The other day, Jeremy and I were arguing about Star Wars. Jeremy uses every iota of his powerfully creative brain to try to convince himself that episodes 1, 2, and 3 are better than filthy dung parasites trailing behind the mysterious elephant that is the original Star Wars trilogy. And I, like the rest of the sane world, which could throw episodes 1, 2, 3 under the bus, even while in a coma, wish that Jeremy would spend the energy of his beautiful mind in better ways. The thought energy required to convince oneself that The Phantom Menace, The Attack of the Clones, and The Revenge of the Sith are good movies is the same amount of energy desperately needed for discovering cancer's cure, or ending wars in the Middle East, or putting an end to the energy crisis or poverty, Jeremy. But Jeremy, know this, I do not blame cancer or Middle Eastern wars or the energy crisis or poverty on you. In the same way that I do not blame bombs for destruction or McDonald's for obesity. No, I blame all these things on George Lucas. The time and the intellectual energy we've spent either getting over episodes 1, 2, 3, or because we could not get over them, justifying 1, 2, and 3, could have been spent making a utopia of this world, a paradise in which sin nature is at last tamed and the apocalypse is rendered unnecessary. Thanks, George, appreciate it. But look, Jeremy, I'll give you this. Lucas isn't the only one in the world who's made mistakes like giving a supposedly significant villain the name Count Dooku. Tolkien, the Oxford philologist and world-famous medievalist, did, after all, reach into his magical grab bag of names and pull out Sauron and Saruman in the same lazy fist, which is the equivalent of having twins and naming them Tim and Tim. Also, Tolkien did choose to name the most significant mountain in all of Middle-earth Mount Doom, which admittedly is a step up from his original name for the mountain, which was Mount Really Bad Place. And Jeremy, I won't say that the original Star Wars are without fault. I won't, because they're not. Consider the Death Star. Why would its engineers create a self-destruct button that a cross-eyed dyslexic garden gnome could set off by bumping into it? Why? Yes, the originals had bad patches, but here's why they were good. As you know, Harrison Ford had enough clout during the making of the originals to reject many of George Lucas's incomprehensibly stupid ideas. Ford acted as a sort of rogue editor, directing himself and even writing lines for his character and every character in-house. Ford served as a filter that caught most of the greasy nuggets of Lucas madness. Then he discarded them and did something awesome instead. From 77 to 83, through A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi, Lucas and Ford played a game of telephone. A game that consisted of Lucas suggesting something ridiculous and awkward and inappropriate and culturally insensitive and racist, and Ford saying, I'm not doing that. No one here is saying or doing that. That's why Darth Vader didn't appear pantsless in his final battle with Luke, and that's why the Death Star wasn't named the Bad Ball. And that's why Luke was not allowed to travel back in time and impregnate Padme and marry Padme's sister, so that when he kissed Leia in A New Hope and again in The Empire Strikes Back, he would not only be kissing his sister, but his daughter and his niece. Ford said no. Lucas said, excuse me? Ford said, shut it. Lucas said, how woo? But ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy isn't here tonight to defend Star Wars 1, 2, and 3 because that's impossible. And he's giving up 1, 2, and 3 tonight so he can use his mind to save the world. The other day I caught Jeremy sleeping on one of the yellow sickle moon couches that bookend the biblical seal in Old Main. Jeremy wasn't sleeping sitting down, having given in to accidental rest. He was stretched out full length. And because he's a tall man, his head rested at one end of the couch, and his feet dangled at the other end, eliminating in one snoozy gesture 9.5 seats. And, resting upon Jeremy's sternum, as though it were ballast to keep him from floating off too high into dreams, was Augustine's City of God, a book about as large as any 3 or 4 properly edited books. I took this opportunity to pull up a chair, insert a soccer horn's nimble end into Jeremy's ear, and speak ideas directly to his brain. The next Star Wars argument we had wasn't an argument at all, but a delightful conversation. But since then, I've experienced increasing hostility day by day as the inoculation of my ideas had dissolved in his acidic system and full Jeremy has returned. Without that influence which in old days came from the soccer horn and moved earth and heaven, but better than that, I must admit, for now it comes to us from his own mind. That which he is, he is. One defiant son of heroic heart, made weak by time and dream messages, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jeremy Schep.
I was gonna go to Tachi's station to pick up some power converters.
Not in your life, get to work.
All right, yes, it is true. We do like to argue about Star Wars. And I do hold very strong opinions that some may find irrational, such as Revenge of the Sith is a superior film to Return of the Jedi. I'm sorry to say that, that's just how it is. Thank you. But I wrote an essay to show you that there is some rational thought behind these crazy opinions. This is a memoir about my college years, kind of my development, and I am dedicating it to my teachers. It is called What I've Learned. Okay. Don't do it, son. It just doesn't suit you. How do you know that? I know you, son. It was only the first week of college. I was enjoying my classes and looking forward to the next 4 years of learning. And yet I had already decided that I did not know what it was for. For the next 2 years, I was going to be waking up for an early bus at a stop a half-mile away from my house, sit and wait for the 25-minute drive down to a transit hub in downtown Syracuse, 5 minutes away, then transfer to the bus up to campus, listen to the kid sitting in front of me share his music through those Beats by Dre headphones that are really speakers posing as headphones, waiting 30 minutes for the bus, waiting 30 minutes for the bus to arrive at a campus 10 minutes away, then navigate through a crowd of equally embittered students, then walk across campus in Syracuse weather, all for an associate in humanities. That wasn't going to get me a real job. If I wasn't getting a job after all this, I knew I would hate myself forever. The classes themselves were all right, save dismal blocks of math. I was, for lack of a better word, enjoying myself. English 103 allowed me to develop my critical thinking and writing, and the professor was a woman I had known from church. Spanish 101. Despite the professor's stammers and strange ideas when it came to practical assignments, brought a joy that I found simply in speaking the language. History 121 was an obvious favorite, as history was my strongest subject in high school. And our young teacher cussed, cracked jokes, and screened movies on Fridays. Even public speaking was too easy not to enjoy, to not enjoy. Why did I feel a need to change my major then? Because my friend Josh was getting a job with his business degree. Because Jaron was taking useful classes with fancy names like macroeconomics that taught him practical things that would get him a car. I wanted a car. I did not want the bus. I know you, son, and I say, not a chance. It just doesn't suit you. I wasn't looking at my father's smiling yet visibly concerned face, but at the pavement. Here was my father, my first teacher, a man whom I had been in rebellion against for the past year. He's the strong, unwavering Christian pastor, then I must be the confused, cynical agnostic. He's the left-leaning Canadian, well, then I'm the all-American, anti-establishment libertarian. And now here I was, arguing with him about my future. He wanted me to keep pursuing history. I want a job after I graduate, I told him. I need to be a business major. This isn't meant only to tell my story. I can't even claim my story as solely my own. This is the story of my teachers as well, and their contribution to my story. How often do we take our teachers for granted? In America, the cult of the self-made man makes it so that we overlook the fact that not one man or woman who has found success has been without their teachers. When I look at my achievements, of which there are several if I look closely enough, I promise, I don't only see my own successes. I see the successes of many people that God has placed in my life. I sometimes fail in realizing just how flawed and contradictory the culture that our society has built truly is. The society that teaches that the individual is above all and that, ironically, society is the enemy. Only as far as creating what my advisor, Dr. Miller's subject of study, Christopher Lasch, might call the culture of narcissism can we truly say, yes, a society that favors individualistic principles and self-serving over altruism and self-sacrifice for the sake of others is a society that is in rebellion against God. I look back at my 21 years and cannot help but say the obvious, that everything that got me to this point was not done entirely by my own means. There are 7 billion people on this earth that God has given us to learn from and to teach. This is why I remember my teachers. I will tell you about 3 of them. Let's begin then in the most rudimentary place, my young ever-growing mind. According to my own psychology professor, whom I place a lot of faith in, it takes the human brain until about the age of 25 to fully develop. If I've got only 4 years left for my brain to reach full maturity, then I've got a lot of work cut out for me. But from an early age, I felt that I had a pretty clear idea of how my mind works, and that was a mind radically different from those of my peers. This, I've reluctantly concluded, is simply not true. The writer David Foster Wallace once wrote, "Everybody is identical in their secret unspoken belief that, way deep down, they are different from everyone else." For a long time, I took pride in my individuality, and I frequently still do. I would go out of my way to be the outlier in my peer group. If they liked something, say red licorice, I hated such a thing and would vocally champion the black licorice. But from middle school onward, this mindset of being special gave way to a feeling of all-out loneliness. The boy who enjoyed being the weird kid, the introvert sandwiched between 2 outgoing, charismatic brothers, was now praying for new friends, friends that wouldn't be stolen by the other guys. I was in my mind inferior when it came to everything that mattered. After dreaming of becoming a marine biologist and oceanographer like my hero, Jacques Cousteau, I failed earth science, a subject my peers seemed to briskly swim through, twice. When I dreamed of becoming a world-famous journalist, I discovered my issue with meeting deadlines. What was left? History. Useless, boring, irrelevant. And something that made me weird. I had memorized the presidents in one day. My favorite thing to do in study halls was read a book that held all the information regarding the presidents. To me, it was fuel for dominating at Trivial Pursuit, not useful information that would contribute to my career as a successful adult. Then I met Mr. Falco. He has a face like no other. Brown, youthful for a man in his 60s, with the kind of broken nose that says, "I'm from Brooklyn, the real Brooklyn. I've been through some stuff." His voice with its rounded vowels contrasting with the angular nasal of the Syracusan confirms this. Blue collar sounding enough to be from the same state, but different enough to be from another region. He was possibly the most unlikely mentor God would place in my life. I am a registered Democrat, and sometimes outspoken about it. He is a Republican, and often outspoken about it. FDR was my favorite president during the pre-war years. Calvin Coolidge was his. And most contentiously, I am a Yankees fan. He is a Mets fan. Still, at least he was cheering for a team from New York. And at least we both opposed abortion. But what really connected us was our fascination with the U.S. presidents. And as far as cultivating my love for history, nobody could have done the job better. Here's a man whose candor and constant state of tangents made an inevitable 11th grade U.S. history class more than enjoyable, but an experience. His stories always seemed unrelated, yet they were disparately connected. My grandfather emigrated from Italy to Ellis Island, he said in one of his many stories. I did not quite know the significance behind the story yet, nor did my 16-year-old mind truly care yet. Then he gave the next detail of the story, hamming it up in a way only a Brooklynite could. When he stepped off the boat, Governor Theodore Roosevelt was there to greet all of the immigrants. He shook hands with my grandpa. I was born several years later. Of course, I shook hands with my grandpa. He smiled warmly and held up his right hand like a trophy. So, in a way, I shook hands with Theodore Roosevelt. Mr. Falco helped me see the true value of history through the understanding of familial heritage. It wasn't until I underwent my 11th grade education under him that I realized the significance of my own ancestors, who themselves had emigrated from Holland during Nazi occupation to a new life in Canada. Before I had been horrified at the idea of being a product of a sequence of such horrifying events. As people living in a perpetual state of sin, however, we should remember that it is not the events and circumstances that define us, but the places we come from, the people we have been a part of that have overcome such situations. He also helped me learn that I was not a weirdo. When I answered the question about Thomas Jefferson's death on July 4th, 1826, coinciding with John Adams' passing, he did what I liked least of all. He put me on the spot. Yes, Jeremy over here is really interested in the presidency, he told the class. I remember when I was your age, he turned to me, saying, I was the same way. I took a moment to register this. You, Mr. Church of God minister, downstater, Larry Falco, were like me? I hadn't heard that from a teacher. I hadn't expected it from this man of all people. My high school history teacher, perhaps unwittingly, was teaching me more than just history. In that moment, I felt connected, no longer alone nor afraid. Year of high school and freshman year of college were spent in a spiritual limbo, occasionally being reawakened, only to be knocked out again. When I reaffirmed my faith in Christ, I had left Faith Heritage Christian School and had survived a confusing first year at Onondaga Community College. Culture shock had shaken the foundations of my entire person. I never took into consideration the fact that many of my neighbors were Native American. I was like Jason Bourne. Aside from running, performing stunts, and jumping over objects to catch the bus every morning, I had entered a vast, hostile world, forgetful of who I was. I was missing an identity. Identity is important in forming a person, but sometimes it is also divisive and does not go far enough in connecting us. Many people find their identity in the word Christian, but they always live out the words that such an identity entails. My initial answer was no, they did not, leading to a temporary disdain for organized religion. I wanted to attend my own internal church, find a faith in Christ without Christianity. But this only led back to the frustrating disconnect I had experienced long before. My sophomore year in the fall semester was far more interesting. Ecology, history of the Iroquois, history of philosophy. Ecology helped me see the manifest design behind every part of nature. History of the Iroquois helped me learn how to empathize with people separated by culture and most notably time. But most importantly, philosophy made sure that I understand the often used idea of false dichotomy, prevalent in culture and the academy. This is where I introduce Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, professor of English, was not at all like Mr. Falco. In fact, he may have been his direct opposite, save his perpetual state of friendliness. A Bostonian, a lapsed Catholic, and practicing agnostic, he introduced me to critical theory that was not aligned with Mr. Falco's traditional reading of historical narrative. I haven't been able to hear the word critique without hearing it in Mr. O'Connor's voice. My mentors Falco and O'Connor were as alike as Billy Graham and Noam Chomsky. I met Professor O'Connor at the OCC Film Club, of which I was to become president a year later. I found his insights of the movies we watched to be fresh and interesting. His literary mind, complemented with an encyclopedic knowledge of film history, made the discussion of the film engaging. We exist as a club to promote film culture, he said. Film that allows people to think, not just show off Matthew McConaughey's abs. I began to immerse myself in film culture. While I never repented of my cinematic sins when it came to loving certain movies, I began watching movies with a critical eye, poring over reviews by Roger Ebert and Pauline Kael. My critical mind was widening, and I did it while watching movies. My sophomore year was a happy one, although my renewed faith brought about a healthy concern. I still wanted something to connect me with the non-believers I had grown to love over the past 2 years. Because if the moniker community college was anything to go by, well, then this was my community. I wanted to love like Christ did without turning them away. I had heard Mr. O'Connor's ideas about religion over the many discussions we held in English class and in the club, and all evidence pointed to tolerance, yet ambivalence. In a discussion of The Sandbox, which features the Angel of Death as a prominent character, it's a stage play, O'Connor was commenting on the relationship between realism and non-realism. This play would not be considered realistic because of the angel's appearance, he stated, soon adding, "If any of you believe in an angel coming down and taking your soul into the afterlife, I'm not saying that's unrealistic. That's reasonable. I simply have no idea." Was that declaration of agnosticism out of respect or out of conviction? The sincerity in his voice hinted at both. One of my final encounters with Mr. O'Connor was at one of my final appearances at Film Club. It was LGBTQ month, and the film club had to screen a film that related to such issues in order to remain a club. As president of the club, I was obligated to appear. Before the film, which chronicled a young man's transition into his life as a woman, the professor told us about a discussion panel he had attended that addressed the issues that homosexual and transgendered people were faced with. He was happy to mention the presence of a minister. Because, you know, he said, a lot of churches are hostile to these people. I couldn't help it. I raised my voice for, in my mind, Christ's kingdom, for the souls around me, and for the slandered church that was struggling to survive and remain relevant in these fluctuating times. I stammered. I'm a Christian, you know, and I'm not hostile, I don't think. He looked at me with an expression that was either a vague smile or a benign grimace. It's a false dichotomy, he said. I used to hate everything about the church until up about 10 years ago. Many people who I work closely with, in caring for our community do so because of their Christian faith. I was relieved. In a college where certain professors tore kids apart for their expressions of faith, my chosen intellectual mentor saw things that went beyond identity. How willing should we as Christ followers be to caucus with non-believers? Fellowship with believers is necessary and mandated by Scripture, but connection with nobody but those who share a common identity does nothing for Christ's kingdom. I found my true calling has come to be in the field of education at a secular public institution, not because of a desire to escape my past, which I firmly believe is not possible, but out of a desire to look beyond identity and see the soul inside of people that Christ sees as worth saving. My father recently told me that I had made the right choice to come to Geneva. He was right. I'd come for intellectual satisfaction. I had found it. I'd come for a spiritual cultivation. I had found it. But most of all, I'd come with a desire to apply what I had learned and what my father had taught me that day. That we learn and are taught not to become something but someone. That life is not a list of goals but a painful ongoing process. And that God sees unique creations in every individual with an equal amount of beauty, no matter how broken by sin. Had he not changed my mind, this essay would certainly have been shorter.